Scott Lauber covers the Phillies, Philly.com, the Inquirer, Daily News. He joins us here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline to help shed some light on what exactly is happening. He spent some time in Clearwater, taking a little break from the Florida sun, but let's dive in on the Phils and what's happening now where, Scott, I know it seems that people are growing frustrated. Do you get the same feeling?
You sound like just a totally beaten man. You're just totally defeated.
I'm at the point now where I'll just kind of wait and wait till something's official. But people ask me, is it today? I'm done giving that prediction.
Yeah, I stopped giving that prediction about at least a month ago, like what the timeline was going to be. I mean, you just don't know. Here it is. Spring training is not only underway, games are underway, and the guy isn't in camp yet. So we shouldn't be surprised. It was March 11th last year when Scott Boras got his deal with Jake Arrieta done with the Phillies. So we shouldn't be shocked about this. But, the longer it goes, the more you have to wonder, are they trying to create a market that's not there? What's it going to take for the Phillies to win this bidding? That kind of thing. So it's just on and on it goes. And there's so many facets to it. And you get, so much information, like talking to different people who all have varying agendas too, to sort of propagate for this whole thing. So filtering out the truth from the posturing is kind of a difficult thing to do at this point. So, I'm kind of with you. I think we'll have a better sense that it's getting close when it's getting close. And I just haven't gotten that sense yet. Even when John Middleton flew to Las Vegas on, Friday night, I kind of, you were hearing things like, well, John doesn't expect to have a deal when he leaves there. So, I don't know. I mean, it certainly made it seem like it was getting closer and closer to having something happen. But again, I haven't really gotten the feeling that there's going to be pen to paper on anything anytime soon. And then, of course, you say that, and all it takes a phone call for it to actually happen. So, we don't know. At this point, we keep waiting.
So, Scott, you had tweeted earlier, is this a reason to be concerned or part of the negotiation that the Dodgers kind of got entered into this mix here? When you hear L.A., I think with Bryce being in Vegas and kind of he's got a kind of a Hollywood attitude, that I think that scared people.
Well, he's a West Coast guy. There's no doubt about it. I think if everything were equal, he would choose the West Coast team over the East Coast team. It's no slight to Philly. It's I think the one exception to that might be the Yankees. I mean, when he was, if you look back at comments he made when he was 16 years old, he talked about, playing for the Yankees. So maybe they would be the exception. Were they at all interested, which they haven't been this whole entire time. But, I think he'd always pick the West Coast over the East Coast. The thing is, what we keep hearing from people who are tied in pretty close to the Dodgers is that it's a short-term thing for the Dodgers. Now, I don't know what that means. I don't know if that means, 3 years, 4 years, certainly means far less than 10 years. And West Coast or not, Dodgers or not, I've never gotten the sense from the Harper camp that they were interested in the short-term deal. I think they were interested the whole time in breaking records and getting a deal that was going to be a record-setting free agent deal. And so I don't think they're going to get that from the Dodgers. I really don't. And so for me, in looking at this, I think the Phillies are still going to come in with the highest offer. And I think if he wants to get the deal he's been looking for all along, or that we've thought he's been looking for, it's going to be from the Phillies. I've seen too many times where you see a player who signs somewhere and you just know it's not the player's first choice. I mean, I remember 3 years ago or 4 years ago now, David Price wanting to go to the St. Louis Cardinals and wound up signing with the Boston Red Sox, and it was not his first choice, but they offered him $217 million, which, I think is still the highest overall deal for a pitcher in free agency, and he wasn't going to turn that down. So I think if Bryce Harper's looking to get, $300+ million, beat the Machado number, maybe even beat the Giancarlo Stanton 325 number, which I know is not free agency, it's going to have to come, I think, from the Phillies, because I don't think the Dodgers are going to go that far. It's not been their organizational philosophy under Andrew Friedman, and I don't know this late in the game, this late in the process, that it's going to suddenly become their organizational philosophy now.
Scott, what's been the number one biggest holdup throughout this whole entire process? If you can pinpoint one thing that's the reason here we are, Monday, February 25th, still trying to figure out when and where Harper's going.
Well, I think it started late, right? I mean, the Phillies went out there to Vegas on, January 11th. So that was already almost the middle of January. And it's just, I just think if those meetings had started, let's say, in December, or, even just prior to the winter meetings, I think that this thing would have maybe accelerated sooner. So I think maybe it got off to a later start, and probably by the design of Scott Boras and his team, that's when they wanted to really sit down and start getting serious, and that's the way it went. I've been saying all along too that I think these deals are very complicated. We're not talking about a straight 10-year, $300 million contract, which in and of itself would be, when you're talking about numbers that high and years, that many years, I think you would be into territory that normally you don't get to. But these deals have opt-out clauses and they have no trade clauses. I don't think the Phillies are far enough down that road yet where they're, haggling over what year Harper should get an opt-out or whatnot. But that's also going to be a factor in all of this. I don't think this sort of a deal gets negotiated overnight. So even if, Harper comes to the realization that his best deal is going to come from the Phillies, I think it's going to take time to hammer it out and get it to the point where it's something that's ready to be signed.
Scott Lauber covers the Phillies for the Inquirer, the Daily News, Philly.com. Scott, how cognizant do you think, especially Middleton is, he made the comment, so he's got to live with that people are growing restless with this, yet they're seemingly being pretty patient?
I think that they were very cognizant last week of the fact that Harper is sort of the people's choice over Machado. That I think that when the Padres got to 300 and the Phillies decided to walk away, my belief at least is that part of that had to do with the fact that they knew that the fans preferred Harper. I don't think they're as wrapped up in the notion that it's taking this long, because I think they view this as kind of like the process. It's not anything that, I don't know that they went into this thinking it would drag into March the way Arrieta did, but certainly if there was a possibility of it, given the agent and the player and the size and scope of the deal, that it would linger into March. So I don't know that they're as caught up in the fact that people just want it to be over one way or the other already. I think they knew what they were in for. I just think that they have to do what they have to do. I mean, I've talked a lot about here and in other places about Harper or any player really, and why the players usually tend to take the money, even if it's not their preferred destination. And a lot of players say it's for the players who come after you. Like just the other day, I think Mookie Betts, who's a free agent in 2 years, was asked about the Machado deal, and he said it was a great deal for Manny and a great deal for everyone who comes after Manny. And I think players feel that obligation, right, to the next group of free agents and the one after that to kind of keep raising the bar. Well, same way, I think the teams feel an obligation to go to a point where they can sign a player but not go crazy, because, like, look, if the Phillies blew everyone away and they were like, look, money is no object, we're going to go $375. Well, I mean, that sort of changes, that moves the bar so high on the rest of the teams that I think teams do feel some kind of obligation to the industry that they're not going to just go hog wild. So, the Phillies want the player, but they don't want the player at any cost. They want the player at, sort of like what the market will bear. So I think it's determining what the market will bear and should bear for Bryce Harper and where they walk away. I mean, we knew that their walkaway point from Manny Machado was somewhere south of 300. They weren't going to get to 300. Are they going to go to 300 on Harper? I mean, they better be willing to, because otherwise they're wasting their time. I mean, I think he's gonna either sign a deal that's more than Machado's deal, and maybe that's part of this too. I've thought a lot about this. You know, maybe if you're Scott Boras, and if the Phillies are not there yet, if they're not at 300, and you're like, well, I'm worried that they're going to walk away, right? It's the one team that's willing to go long term for a lot of money. If they don't get to the number that you want and they walk away, you don't want to be left holding the bag. So why not talk to a team like the Dodgers, who are not willing to go 10 years, but maybe they're willing to get to a pretty high average annual value. I mean, maybe you can beat the $34.4 million Zach Greinke deal over 4 years or 3 years. You could get $40 million, let's say, over 3 years, and at least you could puff out your chest and go, we set a record for average annual. You know, you didn't set the record for overall, but you got the average annual, and you moved the bar for future free agents. And now you bet on yourself that you go back out on the market in 3 years or 4 years, and you try to top that. So, you know, that could be a play here too from the Harper Boras side, is that you're just trying to keep your options open in case the Phillies say, look, it's too rich for us, we got to walk away.
Scott, you mentioned that the Phillies are looking at this as not anything too long or that it's going bad or anything like that. It's just the process. That's how you worded it. So I want to ask you, is this process bad, good, neither for baseball? Is there a chance that they look to adjust this quote-unquote free agent process for the future?
I don't think it's good for baseball at all. I mean, I think what you're hearing, I'm sure what you're hearing from your callers and what I hear from readers who email me is that, you know, they're tired of this. Like, you know, season's going to open in a little over a month. March 28th is right around the corner. And, you know, you get to the point where you're like, enough is enough. Just pick a team. And Major League Baseball, I'm sure, wants its best players in camp. You know, camps opened in the middle of February, and neither Manny Machado nor Bryce Harper were in a camp. Games are going on right now, and Bryce Harper is not in any games. You know, I know these games don't count, but how can you not want your best players on the field?
Well, can I ask you this, though, Scott? I mean, the NBA thrives on drama. Like,
right.
Giannis is going to go to Golden State in 2 years, and this guy's going to go here, and these two guys are going to team up. Is baseball kind of secretly saying, this is kind of great that these guys are talking about our best player every single day, even if it's not about what team he's on and where he's playing, just he's in the conversation, we're in the conversation all the time.
Yeah, look, that's certainly true, I think, to a point. You know, I've joked around for years and years and years about the winter meetings in December, and I've asked people in baseball, kind of half kidding and half not, like, do you really need to even do this? Like, in the age of cell phones and email, why do you all have to get under one roof in the second week of December for? I mean, can't you just do as much business from home? And they say, of course you can. But I think Major League Baseball loves the idea of everyone being under one roof. And so for 4 or 5 days, the headlines are baseball, baseball, baseball. And I'm sure baseball does like the fact that the offseason is not over in the blink of an eye, that it stretches out over the course of the winter. So as much as we're talking about Bryce Harper in November, you're still talking about him in January. But I don't think you want this getting into spring training. I think, you know, to a point, it's good to stretch it out and expand the drama, but then it gets tiresome. It gets sort of, you wear people down. And I think we're at that point where I think people are just worn down. I mean, they're sick and tired of day after day of rumor after rumor, and is it true, is it not true? Is there a mystery team, is there not? So I'm all for, you know, spreading out the drama for an entire off season, but we're no longer in the off season. We're in spring training. The season's right around the corner, and the guy is not in a camp and doesn't want to play. Now, having said all of this about, you know, that it would be a good idea to have a deadline, they can't just unilaterally, Major League Baseball can't just unilaterally say, okay, free agents all have to be signed by February 1st. It's got to be collectively bargained. And I think that there are going to be people on both sides, the team side and the player side and the union side, who say, no, a deadline is no good because, look, you know, the deal that Scott Boras could have gotten for Bryce Harper on February 1st might be significantly less than what he ends up with on whatever day he signs. So I think there are going to be people on both sides who are not willing to impose a deadline because it's going to sort of short circuit, you know, the deal that they could possibly get. Where if you're a team, sometimes there's an advantage to waiting it out, and then the market that the agent thinks will develop never does. Yeah. and you get a player at a cut rate deal or a lesser deal than you would have if you would jump the gun in November and sign the player. I mean, Andrew McCutchen signed a great deal in November that I don't think would be available to him if he waited into January and February. So there are elements of waiting for a team that I think pays off too. So this has to be collectively bargained, and I think there are going to be voices on both sides who say it's not in our best interest.
In the end, is Philadelphia because, man, I remember talking about this back in November. I mean, we had talked
in the summer.
Everybody, they have the most money. They're going to go up to whatever, $400 million, stupid money. I mean, in the end, it almost seemed like it made too much sense and that there was not going to be a suitor. But in the end, it was one of those things that everyone just said, it's the Phillies, it's the Phillies, it's the Phillies. But it just isn't going to be the Phillies. Like, do you feel like that all this hype will end up being a huge disappointment, that he just doesn't want to come here?
Always possible. I mean, I think that the soundbite of the spring so far for me was, Andy McPhail at the tail end of that press conference, whatever day that was, when right around the time camp opened, where he said something to the effect of, "We're only half of this." In relation to signing free agents, we're only half of the equation. And that's true. I mean, look, you get into free agency, there's only so much you can control as a team. And if the player just doesn't want to go, you can't make the player take your money. Now again, almost all the time, the money wins. If you're the highest bidder, you usually get the player. I mean, there are exceptions. Cliff Lee, right? Like, left some money on the table from the Yankees to come back to the Phillies. It happens. I mean, let's not forget that he got a huge deal to come back to the Phillies too. So, what was he leaving? I think there's a bigger difference if you're Bryce Harper and you end up taking, let's say, a 4-year, $160 million deal from the Dodgers when you could have had a 10-year, $300+ million deal from the Phillies. That's a big difference. And I think that, if that happens, we're going to be talking, the conversation will go into a whole other area of why don't players want to come to Philly? What's wrong with Philly? Why can't the Phillies attract these guys? That's going to be the conversation if he winds up going somewhere else for considerably less overall than what we all figure he's going to get. But it does take two to tango, and that's the thing about free agency. It's never a slam dunk that you're going to get the player, because the player might not want you. And so, sure, at the end of all of this, he might end up somewhere else. And if that happens, we're going to have to probe into questions about why that is. And is Philly a destination for guys in baseball? And if not, why not? And I think that that's a conversation for down the road if he winds up in L.A. or if he winds up in San Francisco. But, I think that they're still confident that they have the money to make this happen. And they, certainly the owner seems to have a desire to want this player. And that's where we are.
Scott, let's play pretend here and that actually does happen. Harper goes somewhere else, wherever it may be. Is this, I'm just bracing for impact here from the reaction from the city and the fans that, like you said, are already saying they're over it, they're done, they're frustrated. It's been an annoyingly long process. How much of a failure, if at all, is this for the organization? How do they bounce back? What are their plans to try and embrace everything that could potentially happen here?
So their spin, and they've already started this, their spin will be that they've still had a really, really good off season. I mean, and in a lot of ways, they're right. They have. I mean, they got better at shortstop. They got Andrew McCutchen, who makes them better in the outfield. They got a really good reliever in David Robertson, and they got the best catcher. If he's not the best catcher in baseball, he's in the top 2 or 3 in JT Realmuto. In a normal, ordinary offseason, that would be considered a smashing success. It's not going to be considered that because this wasn't a normal offseason. And for years, when they began this rebuild back in 2015, they targeted the offseason of 2018-19 as the offseason of Bryce Harper and Manny Machado. And they angled everything so that they were going to have the flexibility financially, the wherewithal to sign one of those guys. And if they come up empty on both, it's going to be a difficult sell for them. even though they've had a really good offseason otherwise, it's not going to be considered the offseason that everyone expected or that was going to make everyone happy. They're also going to spin it by saying that it's not the last offseason, that free agents will be available, and that next winter Nolan Arenado and Anthony Rendon and maybe Paul Goldschmidt will all be out on the market, and the winter after that it'll be Mookie Betts and Mike Trout if they don't sign extensions before that. And, again, that's all well and good, but you don't trade your top prospect, Sixto Sanchez, for a catcher, an all-star catcher with 2 years of control if you're not trying to win right this second right now. And, next year's free agent class doesn't do you any good right now. And certainly Mike Trout in 2 years doesn't do you any good right now. So it's going to be a hard sell for them. And yet, I think you're going to have fans, I'm sure, who are upset that they swung and missed at both of these guys, and they're going to ask why. And like I said, we may even have a little crisis of confidence about why don't players want to come to Philly and all of that. But I think you're probably going to have fans, and I'm sure you guys hear from them, who say, let's just save our money and go get Mike Trout in a couple of years. And I'm sure that there's a segment of the fan base that's going to buy that spin that you're going to get from the Phillies, and we'll see. But I got to believe that the majority of people are going to view it as a failure of an failure might be a strong word, but certainly a disappointment of an off season if they don't get Bryce Harper, because the expectation was you'd come out of this winter with a marquee franchise player who was going to be the face of your franchise going forward for the next decade, and they didn't. If they don't get that guy, people are going to view it as disappointing, regardless of everything else that they've done.
Scott Lauber covers the Phillies. Inquire, Daily News, Philly.com, at Scott Lauber on Twitter. Follow him there for all the latest on the Phillies for spring training. And if something happens with Bryce Harper, I'm sure he will have it as well. As we'll see what happens. Everybody, don't hold your breath for the rest of the day, though. I would tell you probably nothing
or the
happening
week
today. They don't want the Flyers to take them. By the way, Wayne Simmons has been traded. We'll get you the details in a moment. Scott, thanks so much, pal.
Okay, guys, anytime.